Hello, everyone, and welcome to another community conversation on the health crisis in
of personnel.
That's a great
Another
question,
element
and I would
is
direct
well,
them to
thinking outside the box, trying to come up with new ways
And
of
as
moving.
you already mentioned, the city is
Let's try to keep these numbers from doubling.
At over 33%.
I'm glad Ministry of Washington.
First, I want to say thank you for inviting me to the show.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another community conversation right here on Facebook Live. I'm Mayor Eric Pappenfuss, and it's good to have you join us here at noon on Friday, as always. Today's topic is the Codes Bureau and codes enforcement in the city of Harrisburg, with a special discussion of the new eviction moratorium that's gone into effect here in the city. We are delighted to be joined by Codes Administrator Dave Patton and his deputy, the Deputy Administrator Ann Montgomery. And we're going to get to each of them in just a moment. I'm envisioning a slightly different, more town hall style Facebook Live today. So we're counting on you, the audience, to send in your questions or your concerns, and we'll try and address them here right live on the program. A couple years ago, we did a Codes Town Hall at the Hamilton Health Center that was very informative and I think worked very well. So we're going to try virtually here today to open it up to you and have a dialogue. But before we get into those topics, as always, I want to start with a few general announcements. And Momin, we're going to begin with the good news that we got from BioBot this past week. So if you bring that graph up, I think people will be encouraged to see that the curve really has started to flatten. We now have back-to-back samples in February that show that we are at a level that is significantly reduced from where we were in December and January. So I'm encouraged by that. It's still high, but it is, as you can tell from the graph, it's higher than it was really at any point in the fall or over the summer. But it is significantly down from the worst of the holiday season, really between Thanksgiving and the New Year. The next graph shows that as unlike in past months, we're really right at the median national average. If you look at our sample, which is that red line versus the median national sample, we're pretty much dead on. So for a while there, if you've been following, you knew that Harrisburg was sort of above the curve and not representative, but now we seem to be falling back into a little bit more of an average. Bottom line, we're looking at an estimate of about 100 new cases a day being transmitted in the Harrisburg metropolitan area, which is still high. It's too high, and it's a reminder that we need to stay vigilant, but at least it's better than where it's been. So continue to be socially distant, wear masks, wash your hands, take reasonable precautions, but know that hopefully as the vaccine rollout really gets going here in Pennsylvania, we're going to be in a much better place. I think if this holds, the school district will be encouraged, and we may be able to see some return to normalcy as we hit the spring, at least in terms of maybe in-person instruction. But we've sent this on to them, and it is one of their metrics that they're using as they watch. So keep tuning in here, and we'll give you those BioBot updates on a regular basis. Also wanted to announce that this Wednesday there is a special session of Harrisburg City Council. It's going to be the first public meeting on the comprehensive plan, and that is at 6 p.m. and you can submit your comments at harrisburgpa.gov/compplan. I know there's a lot of interest in that particular legislation. There are plans to be a number of different comprehensive plan meetings. This is just the first, but tune in. And again, as I did last time, I'll plug, there is also a community Facebook discussion that happens every Sunday on the comprehensive plan. There's a lot of information out there which should really make this plan better. The final step will be City Council basically voting on amendments and ratifying the plan. And then we will have finally a new guiding document for the city of Harrisburg. It's an exciting time. This Tuesday, not to be confused with this Wednesday, there's the regular work session for council, and I want people to know that we will be bringing back the affordable housing legislation bill. And we're going to be talking specifically about two aspects of the affordable housing legislation. One is a revision to the current tax abatement bill for the city of Harrisburg that would make it easier for affordable housing projects to meet those qualifying conditions. This is an important conversation. It's been 5 years since we passed the tax abatement for the city, and this is sort of the midpoint of a 10-year review, and it's important that people be engaged and weigh in. So affordable housing Tuesday, the comprehensive plan Wednesday. It's going to be a busy week for city government. Another general announcement, Treasury asked that we remind folks that they are open Wednesdays only to the public. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't drop off bills really at any time, because there is a drop box which can be utilized 24/7, and you can call them at 717-255-3046. But if you want to see them in person to pay your bill, a reminder, they're only open on Wednesdays. February, of course, is Black History Month, and I wanted to plug a couple things in honor of the month. And as a bookseller, I think I ought to start with a book. And one of my favorite books is African Americans of Harrisburg by John Scott. I'm fairly certain it'll be available at the Good Brothers Cafe in Midtown. It's certainly available at Midtown Scow and other bookstores. So check it out. It's a good way to learn about our history. And I also wanted to give a shout out to Kevin Butts and his Facebook group, Concerned Citizens of Harrisburg, because they've been doing a number of historic profiles of prominent African Americans throughout the community. I suggest you scroll into Kevin's feed and take a look at what he's doing. It's been really interesting and a great way to celebrate our collective history. Then finally, we have business development training coming up. The city's business development office is going to be offering Power Your Job Search with Google on February 25th. That's going to be from 9:30 to 10:30 in the morning. And the session is going to allow attendees to discover not only new job opportunities using Google search, but how to organize, enhance your job search experience using all sorts of Google tools. It's pretty neat. And registration information can be found also on our Harrisburg.pa website. And I think Momin's got that up there on the screen for you to look at. So many interesting things coming up, lots of ways to get involved in city government. Now, part of the reason that we chose today's topic is because there's always a lot of questions about codes enforcement in the city of Harrisburg, what's happening. We've made a lot of changes and a lot of improvements over the past years. I want to talk a little bit about how the codes department has grown and developed, and we're going to get to that. But I want to begin with the issue of the eviction moratorium, because probably most questions and a lot of focus is really on that. And I'll start with you, Dave. As you know, we have passed a moratorium in Harrisburg, which is really the first of its kind in Pennsylvania. It is stricter than the national moratorium, and it makes it very clear that individuals can't be evicted due to the inability to pay their rent. And it's something which we are about to extend now for a third time to last from basically mid-February into mid-March. And it is brought about under the authority vested in the emergency declaration here for COVID. We don't want to make a homelessness situation worse. We don't want to make it harder for people to have safe and reasonable shelter in the midst of a pandemic. From your perspective, as codes administrator, can you let us know how you think the moratorium is working, and talk to folks a little bit about how what your job is in terms of ensuring that people aren't evicted?
Yes, good afternoon, Mary. Yeah, right now we haven't had a particular situation where we've had to move forward with any kind of enforcement regarding the moratorium, and that's basically it's for the district justices. They're not processing any of those particular cases right now, so they're catching that from the front end. I would stress that I do get emails regarding the issue, and each one of those I have to investigate thoroughly. Whenever someone does have some questions regarding the moratorium, they are to I would urge them to use their email and contact codes at harrisburgpa.gov. I look at that personally, my deputy looks at that, and I do respond to them directly, and we do go back and forth, just so I can find out what the situation is. One of the things that's most important is I have to investigate. I have to investigate what the situation is there. I will investigate with the landlord's take on things, and then I'll have to make a decision on that particular point where to move from there. It is important to make sure that we do have enough evidence to move forward with everything. As everybody should know, that the moratorium is more specific to those that are delinquent on their rental payments. A lot of the evictions, there's still evictions going on, but they're for other situations that aren't related to delinquency and the rental payments. And I'm always happy to answer any of the questions in regards to that, because I know a lot of people are distressed. And so, I work them through that. Generally, I like to keep everything on email. And the reason for that is so I can keep proper documentation. If there's a phone call, I have no problem with doing that. But most of the time, I like to keep things on email so that both us, me and the tenant, have that paper trail of everything that was, occurred during the conversation and situation. And then at that point, I'll let them know, what we're going to do from there. If we have to move forward with enforcement, then that's something that we'll pursue.
Yeah, and I would say a lot of times just the very threat of enforcement is enough to ensure compliance. And as you say, we have a situation here where our district justices understand the moratorium. They support it, and they're not processing evictions for non-payment of rent. There may be an eviction for, say, damage to property or some sort of criminal issue, but those require an order from the district justice. And if there is no such order, we are there to help, and nobody should be threatened or intimidated with a lockout or that they're going to go on the streets in violation of this moratorium. Now, you gave an email address, and I think that's great. We also allow people to call 311. If they call during business hours, they may get transferred to you, and you may ask them to follow up with a written request, just so, as you say, these things can be documented. But bottom line is, we're there to enforce this if need be. Can you talk a little bit about your relationship with the police department and how, in some circumstances, we can also utilize them potentially to file some sort of criminal complaint?
Sure. Once I get a thorough investigation of everything, then if it looks like it's something that we are going to move forward with, I will get with the police department and then start put the wheels in motion. Some of the times, what I found out is during my investigation and then going back and forth with both parties, that the police have already been, at the property for some certain circumstance. And with that, then I will contact police to look at that report and see exactly what the particulars are, relative to their arrival at that particular property. But it is essential that I want to assure that once you need to make sure we have exact information and evidence that we can present within a court of law. So the investigation is very thorough. It's very thorough between the tenant, landlord, and the police department, myself. It's a very important matter, very important matter. So I make sure that I deal with a lot of this stuff on a very personal level. This is not, I would stress that this is not something that's relegated to the tasks of any of the code enforcement officers. This stays solely with myself and my deputy. We are the only two individuals that respond to these and conduct our investigation. We like to keep the circle tight. We like to keep it, the more people you involve in a circumstance, the more things tend to get diluted, more evidence. It's this person said this person said that. We need to, we're going to tighten that circle and make it just so it's just very few individuals that are involved in this. We can keep the information tight and we can keep the evidence in place.
Great, and I think that's one of the reasons we wanted to have the two of you on, put a face to this moratorium, so that people know who they're corresponding with and who they're talking to. I had a good conversation with the one of the tenants groups in Harrisburg this past week, and they have confirmed that there is, we haven't had a widespread crisis, in part because of this moratorium, which, as I say, is really first in the Commonwealth. And a lot of folks are looking to what we're doing as a precedent for potentially their own legislation. But at the same time, retroactively, there was some confusion before about this sort of 30-day extension process. So I wanted to make it very clear today that we are extending the moratorium for another 30 days. Nobody can use the ignorance of the law as an excuse to say, well, they weren't sure if the moratorium was going to be extended. And we're going to continue to extend it, while we have a public health emergency, which is currently what we have. Now, we started with those BioBot data. It's encouraging. It's gotten better than it was when the moratorium went in place, but we're still not through the woods. One final question about the moratorium, and maybe we'll have some public questions moment. And if we do, and you want to jump in on the moratorium before we get to codes generally, you can. But can you talk about, so if you do have to cite someone, obviously there's the criminal prosecution of someone that the police could do, but there's also the ability to issue a citation. Can you talk about what the penalties exactly would be for somebody who willfully and in a way that can clearly be established does violate the moratorium?
The citation goes in gradations. In other words, it'll start out at one fee and it can go all the way up to, I believe it's $10,000 for repeated offenses. When someone does this, I mean, it's important to know that once a landlord goes down this path, I mean, I understand there's good tenants in bad situations and there's bad tenants that create bad situations. But nevertheless, once the landlord goes down this path, it's sort of a self-inflicted cascading effect on the landlord, because not only are they going to have to contend with enforcement from this end, but they open themselves up for the suit, by the tenant, and add to that, it could compromise the landlord license. So it's just not worth it. It's not worth to go down this path. Everyone's in a very difficult situation right now, and but to try and lock somebody out or do any other kind of situations to run the tenant out of the building, just try and avoid going through the formal process, it's just not worth it. It's not worth the landlord to go down this path. It's not going to be fruitful. It's only going to be more costly to them. It's just going to involve a whole lot of other particulars that they really don't want to get involved in.
Right, and you mentioned the landlord license. That is sort of the ultimate mechanism that we could do. Revoking a license would be devastating. So we don't want to do that. We want to head it off, and we want people to understand why the moratorium is in place. That we do recognize it's a very powerful tool, and it can't be done lightly, and it needs to be done in extensions. But that we're in a very difficult time. One more comment, because we had some landlords on as we were talking over the past several weeks about the rental relief program. And I want to let people know that the rental relief program is very much up and running. We've been issuing checks continuously, and these are checks that go to the landlords themselves from individuals who qualify for rental relief. We still have several $100,000 left that hasn't been expended, the ability to put even more federal dollars to this. Our Building and Housing Department has been actively processing applications and issuing releasing more funds every week. So if you are a landlord and you do have a tenant who is having trouble making the rent, another option, and a real beneficial option potentially, is to get that tenant and yourself to apply for the rental relief that's out there. A much better solution than the total loss, which is just sort of trying to fight the moratorium. Moment, I'm going to talk generally about codes, but do we have any questions specifically about the moratorium?
Yes, and I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, and then there might be a follow-up as well. So a lot of times we hear things like, my landlord is evicting me, what can I do? And to give some more detail, for example, if a tenant is realizing that there's an immediate situation, the landlord is changing the locks, for example, and restricting access back to the property. What can be done in that situation? And similarly, describe both scenarios. If it's just a payment-related eviction, or if it's for other reasons, is it the same process if they want to make a complaint or get attention to the matter?
I mean, obviously, each one will have to be investigated. But the lockout situation, we consulted on that particular situation, and we will move forward with enforcement on someone that's locked out in their situation. What I ask all the tenants to do when they do is send me any kind of documentation, send me the photographs of anything they can that's posted on their door that mentions anything about what's going on, what the landlord is doing. That gives me more insight as to what exactly is going on. When someone is locked out, I do will follow through with the landlord just to find out what the particulars are in that matter. Regardless of what they are, it is illegal to lock a tenant out of their property, just the same as it's illegal to turn off the utilities to try and scare them out. With that particular circumstance, we will move forward with enforcement measures on that. The typical eviction, the formal process, again, with the delinquent payments, I need to know for sure that that's exactly what it is, if that's what they're trying to do, what the landlord is trying to do. So I would ask the tenant to take a photograph and send me that information so I can look at it in detail and see exactly what's going on. Because most oftentimes, with that eviction notice, it will give the reasons, why they're being evicted from their dwelling. So it's important that all the information that I can get is helpful. Again, I will go back to the landlord. I will call them, email them, whatever I need to do to find out, what exactly is going on, so that I can formulate a plan of action and how I'm going to proceed.
As part of your investigation, are you able to enter homes during this pandemic?
Yes, we do. I do have a set of protocols, very strict protocols put in place, not just for the office, but for the occupants of the dwelling as well. We do try and handle the complaints from here. Most of the times by deputy, we can deal with these ourselves. We contact the landlord, we'll go back and forth with the tenant. The tenant sending pictures is critical. It's absolutely very extremely helpful. Just to figure out where we're going to go, how egregious the situation is. We have been having some good success with the landlords responding. I'll talk to them personally on the matter, go back and forth, and we do get follow-ups, actually from the landlord. If this has been correct, that I even get copies of work notices that they filled out, the tenants have signed to make sure that everything is done. Now, like I said, we'll try and do everything as best we can from here. Depending on the situation, which our deputy and myself will decide on, we could just send a notice out automatically. We can do that too. We'll make that decision, once we see what the particulars are. Also, as far as coming to the property, if it's felt that, I think we better take a look at this. What we'll do is, according to the protocols, we'll call the tenant. We want to make sure we have control, climate control, spirit control of what's going on there. How many tenants are there, or how many individuals? Everyone has to wear masks. Only one individual can take us through. We will look at the situation that they're complaining about, the photographs, whatever we have to do, and exit the property as quickly as we can, and then proceed with any kind of enforcement measures. Our staff will in turn make sure they have masks, all the distancing. The reason we try and get in and get out in a hurry, obviously, is we want to limit any type of exposure. And add to that, there's been situations where we have gone in and all of a sudden people are coming to visit, that sort of thing. So we're kind of in a situation where, it's not very comfortable. These protocols are set for both. We just want to make sure that our staff, make sure the tenants, proper safety is between both are enjoyed. And then we'll follow through with whatever we need to do. Right now, it's our heat season. So we do have to respond to the heat season, and we do make sure we have proper PPE and everything to go in the properties. And again, whenever they call in, those particular situations don't require any type of written. They can just call when they have a heat complaint. The clerical staff will advise them everything relating to the protocols, what is expected, the number, all these situations. The inspector will reiterate those protocols, and then they'll follow those protocols when they go on site. So we think the important thing is to make sure we have a controlled environment and make sure that everyone is safe.
I'm going to just present a scenario to you. Somebody's getting evicted. They got a notice from the landlord. They're getting evicted next Friday. So how long is the process for stopping that landlord from unjustly evicting someone? Can it be met within that period of time?
No, I mean, there can be no physical response. I mean, no one can go out and physically stop it. There is a judicial process. Everything that we do has to comply with the rules of criminal procedure. And yes, a lot of times those rules are slow, but we do have to abide by them, or the case just falls apart or gets dismissed. So that said, that kind of time frame, we won't be able to immediately stop it. If it was, I would do my best. I would do my best, and our deputy would do her best to confront the landlord on the situation, see what, how this can be resolved, what can be done. Again, if it's relating to specifically for the delinquent payments, it shouldn't be an issue because they're not being processed at the district justice. So we're catching that there. So that's, one of the things in the course of our investigation, we'll find out what exactly is going on, but the tenant needs to be aware that if it is specifically for that, it can't be done. And I will, of course, or a deputy, make sure that's conveyed very clearly to the landlord.
Do you see situations where they're not going through the court system, the landlord, and they want to remove somebody from their property, so they just change the locks or restrict access? Has that been a situation?
It hasn't been a dominant occurrence. During the course of my time, years here, I can't recall how many of those situations have occurred, but that said, I can't remember because it just doesn't happen quite often. At least they're not brought to my attention. Because this situation is more center stage. We did hear one particular occurrence, but that was all through the duration of this thus far. I've only been aware of one particular circumstance where that has happened. The only other time that we did get something relating to that was anonymous. It was like third party, second party. Those sort of things kind of muddy up the waters, and it's hard to get real clear evidence on if it did in fact occur. If someone's there and it was alleged that they were locked out and gone, I can't make any contact with the individual because they didn't register the complaint here. It was anonymous to another party and then related back to our office. So it's very important that we know the circumstances, the individual that this is occurring to, that they're being subjected to. All that will play into where we go. What's going to be the next step.
Yeah, and Mo, let me just jump in and make it clear that if somebody is if a landlord is trying to illegally change the locks on somebody and force them out without a justifiable court order in violation of the moratorium, or even without the moratorium, that is an illegal act. You cannot do that. And that landlord will be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. We will try our best to create a situation where that doesn't happen by contacting them and reaching out and doing it. But they can be prosecuted. They can lose their license. And there isn't a landlord in Harrisburg that wants to lose their license. That's sort of the ultimate thing, which is how we started. So we take it very seriously, and we're going to give the benefit of the doubt to the tenant, and we're going to advocate on behalf of the tenant. But by the same token, we need good communication, we need documentation, we need assistance, and I think there are a number of organizations in Harrisburg that will help us do that. And we're also trying to be proactive in making sure that landlords understand what the law is and how to work. There are always going to be bad actors, but if they act illegally, there's a lot that we can do in terms of fine, criminal prosecution, landlord license revocation, et cetera. Hey, I want to get Ann Montgomery into the conversation, and we'll come back, Dave. And another reason we wanted to have the conversation here a little bit, Ann, was to talk just generally about the codes department and what it does and what its major functions are, so that people understand how it works. And I thought also, since you've been with us for some time at the city, you could talk a little bit about how it's changed over the past few years, and sort of where we were and where we are now in terms of your daily functions. So welcome.
Thank you, Mayor. So in the last few years, it's actually grown, the codes department. We have almost double the amount of code officers here at the city. In addition to that, there was a new position that was made, and that was for commercial inspector. So those things have changed in the last, I'd say, three years under your administration, actually. We had been a much smaller department prior to your administration. What the codes department does mainly is, besides answering the complaints, we need all complaints to be on a written complaint, except for the moratorium or a heat complaint that can be called in, and we can address it that way. Oh, I'm sorry, the moratorium, it does need to be documented. We were just going through that. But like a heat complaint, so that could be called in. Another thing that we do, a big part of our department is permits for any work that's being done at the city. There's a building permit, electrical permits, plumbing permits, and also we have electrical licenses and plumbing licenses.
Well, let's can we take those one at a time? So let's talk a little bit about the complaint form process. There is a form. It is available. Where is it available? Tell people, and let's walk us through the form a little bit so that they understand what type of information is required.
So yes, the complaint form is on the Harrisburg City website. You can actually fill that out if you have the capability of a computer. You can fill that out on the computer and actually email it to us directly. Any complaints that we get for your property, it would need to be in writing. Once we receive it, it's assigned to a code officer. They will follow through with, if they need more information, they will contact the complainant if they need things cleared up, or they will send a notice out to the homeowner, to the property manager, and give them so many days by law, where we have to give them so many days to bring that complaint into compliance. If it's not brought into compliance, we then will write a citation. And then from there, it goes to the court system.
Okay, Moen has the complaint form up on the screen. It looks like a pretty straightforward form if I'm looking at the front. So can anyone file a complaint form? If your neighbor, for instance, has a broken sidewalk that is restricting your access to be able to, safely get down the street, or your neighbor has high grass and weeds, can you basically file a complaint? And if you're willing to put your information down, is that satisfactory?
Yes, Mayor. Anybody can file a complaint, and actually we encourage that because we can't get to every building. And so with a complaint, we can address something before it gets worse than what it may be. If there's a vacant property where there's vandalism and it's open, that's a property complaint form. If there's a second complaint form, which would be a tenant landlord complaint form. So there's two different complaint forms, but anybody can file that property complaint form.
Right. Yeah, and tenants would have a different form. Let's stick to that for a second, a moment, just because I think I can hear people right now thinking to themselves, "Oh, come on, what good is filling out a complaint form? This property has high grass and weeds and has had it for the last a decade. Why should someone fill out a complaint form? Why is the documentation important? How does it help in the process?"
it is very important to have that documentation, because when we do go to court, we can show the judge that it's the public that are having issues with this. This isn't somebody that we're picking out and trying to pick on. It's actually the public that are having issues with the property.
Yeah, and I imagine, like other types of complaints, it is important to create a paper trail, a documentation when you go to the legal system. If you're dealing with maybe a different type of complaint, like a nuisance bar or a loud noise or other types of things, if you don't have documentation and you go to court, it's going to be harder. It's going to be harder to get. It's going to be hard to get a judgment, and without a judgment, it's going to be harder to affect change, because we're not going to. You're not going to see the fines, and you're not going to see the evidence, the evidence built up. Yeah. So okay. So that's the basic complaint form. Now, you said the second aspect of codes, or a large aspect, has to do with permitting. Can you talk just generally about what requires a permit in the city of Harrisburg and how people should go about getting them?
Sure. Anything structural would need a building permit. Anything over $1,000 of work would need a building permit. Anything electrical, anything plumbing, when you're running new electrical wires or new pipes, would need a building permit, and also a plumbing permit or electrical permit.
And those latter things would require inspections as well to make sure that they are up to code, right? Can you talk about the reasoning behind a permit? Why do we require a permit for construction over $1,000, for instance?
So we can see and make sure things are being done safely at the property, that they're following the building code.
Right. Okay, good. And it's a pretty straightforward schedule, various fees, and that's number two. Let me switch back to Dave so that we can have again a back and forth. I'll come back to you, Ann. And Dave, I guess the third, one of the third aspects of codes, there's a lot going on here, also has to do with rental inspections and landlord licensing. So can you talk about that aspect of your job and what that entails?
Sure. Yes, the rental registrations, they go out. They have to be complied with every single year. We do a mailing at the end of each year, so that the landlord can register the particular property. And that said, that they go into our database, they're assigned to whatever inspectors in that particular zone. We have 5 different zones established in the city, and they will routinely call up the landlord and set up a time to go into the properties and inspect them for compliance. Now, of course, right now with the COVID-19, that's been suspended somewhat. We are still doing some of the rental inspections in certain situations. We are getting calls from landlords. They're changing occupancy and the property is vacant. So, and that's great. They're calling us to do that. So we'll go in and do those rental inspections. They have to have the property inspected at least one time every 5 years as part of the city ordinance. However, that does not preclude anybody from complaining or us going in again, for whatever situation is going on there. It's just the routine inspections are done once every 5 years. And then once they bring into compliance, then we generate a certificate of compliance for that. Then we're good until the next cycle. But again, right now, until we can get through this health situation, we're kind of in a bit of a suspended category.
I know we also have adopted over the past several years a foreclosure registry for the city of Harrisburg. This is something that we thought was important in part to make sure we had the proper contacts with the banks and with the agencies that own certain properties that were currently vacant due to foreclosure. Can you talk about how that works?
Sure. This I first was made aware of this program, and it was one of those too good to be true things until I spoke with some of my counterparts in Allentown and it's just working fantastic. What happens is that getting involved with the organization of foreclosure, we are supplied a database that has all the foreclosed properties in our specific area. It's just the city of Harrisburg, or the downtown. It's just there. It's not all over. These particular properties, they register their properties, and with that, a lot of information is provided with that. The company that, when we deal with a company that has this, have the inroads to the maintenance people of the organization, whatever institution that may be, banking institution, well, I can't name any, but there's a variety of institutions, but they have the inroads to the maintenance individuals who take care of the properties. And with that, all we need to do is, when we do find something and it is on the registry, we have the ability to do all the notifications, pictures, whatever we need sent right through the system, and it goes directly to the maintenance organization. And I get copied on everything, and then they follow up on it. We don't get an abundant amount of complaints on foreclosed properties, but I mean, anything that helps. I mean, if it saves us on mail, it saves us on pretty much everything. And it has worked very successfully. Yeah, I mean, it's just, it was actually too good to be true at the time, but once I went through and vetted it and talked with other people, it's really great. This works like it saves us time, mailing, registered mail, all the other things we have to do. What I always do is because there's so much information supplied on that property, it actually has the maintenance individual's email and contact person on it. So the inspector will send something, but then simultaneously we'll do an additional notice directly to the maintenance organization who's taking care of the property. So we have a kind of a redundancy there. It's actually proved very successful.
Thanks, Dave. So, Moment, I got one more section of questions for Ann and Dave here, but I thought we could pause again for a second just to see. So, we've talked about sort of the primary day-to-day activities of fielding complaints, of issuing permits, of doing rental inspections. I wonder if there are any questions or from the audience on any of those topics.
Yes, excuse me. There's a question from Alejandro about the forms and how to fill those out, how to submit those, the forms that we were just talking about. Are they fillable on the computer, or do people need to print them out? Do they need to come to City Hall to pick them up? Dave, if you can talk a little bit more about that.
Sure, they can fill them out right online. They're sent directly to the codes at harrisburgpa.gov. They come into our department, they're retrieved, all the information's there. They can mail them, they can print and mail, they can come into the office. There's several different ways they can send in the complaints. And the online seems to work a lot better because there's email addresses. And everyone has a different writing style. I mean, you saw my writing, you'd never be able to read it. But having that on the system that's typed in, I can see very clearly, what the issue is. And these little doubts about the issues, and it's just a lot of information on that online system. So once they come in, we respond to them, print them out, decide what action is going to be taken, and just go from there.
Yep, I think that's the only question for now. Yeah.
All right, Ann, let's go back to you for just a couple more questions. And I guess Dave has touched on this a little bit, but can you talk about how COVID and how the current pandemic has affected your ability or the department's ability to do its job?
Yeah, like Dave Patton said, we can't get inside the property, or we try our best not to have to go inside if the situation doesn't call for that. So we haven't been able to do the rental inspections like we would like to. Like Dave said, every property should have a rental inspection done by a code officer once every 5 years. And so the pandemic has really stopped us from doing that. Instead, though, the code officers are now doing block walks and trying to address exterior issues besides doing progressive inspections, finding people that are doing work without permits and doing stop works. They've generated a lot with going from block to block to see anybody that hasn't, to find people that have not applied for the rental inspection fees. So we've taken a little bit of a different turn, but they're still keeping very busy. And when this pandemic is over, we'll get back inside the property on a regular basis and do our rental inspections. So that's been the big change with the pandemic.
Sure, and I think you've addressed this generally, but maybe it would be helpful to, can you maybe walk us through sort of the day in the life of a typical Harrisburg codes inspector? And I know that you have the codes inspectors assigned by neighborhood. I know that we have more inspectors than we've had, certainly in terms of recent memory. So, what is their day-to-day job like? And maybe take us through a typical day.
Yeah, so they would, when they show up at work, they of course look at their emails, try to address any emails or phone calls that they're receiving, to follow up on the complaints, to see if they've been brought into compliance. There's also any citations that they're written. If it's gone to the court system, then they have to go and testify. So I believe there's 3 different days that they would have to go to court. That takes up time in their daily routine. Besides that, they're doing the block walks, like I said, and finding violations on the exterior part of the properties.
Yeah, I assume part of the idea behind having them assigned to specific districts in the city is to help them really understand a neighborhood and get to know a neighborhood. And is it possible to go to the website and determine who the codes inspector is that's assigned to your where you live easily?
Yeah, I'm not sure if Dave knows if it's on the website or not, but if they wanted to call, we could let them know who is in their area, and there's 2 code officers, like you said, for 5 different areas.
Yeah, Dave, and we can talk about this, but one thing that could be a good idea is taking them to sort of neighborhood organizations and sort of introducing it on a neighborhood by neighborhood basis. I know that's something you have in mind by how you've designed the system. You can talk about that, but let me go back to you really for the final couple questions here, and this is sort of the big question, which I think is on everybody's mind, which is, how can we, how do we deal with the issue of absentee landlords who simply don't care when they get cited, or are absent and neglecting their property? I know this is something which is, frustrated you for a long time. It's something which has led you, I think, to push for some changes on the state level, and we could talk a little bit about that. But I'd say the number one complaint in Harrisburg has to do with an absentee landlord who doesn't care about their property. So how can we address that, and what are both the impediments to addressing it, but what are some potential solutions that may be on the horizon?
Yes, that is the most challenging situation throughout Harrisburg. It was basically the vacant and abandoned properties, because the tax sales are pretty much our center of gravity. I mean, there isn't anything that prohibits an individual from buying a condemned property and then selling it, buying and selling it. It's a lot of it's just they're running after them all the time. Just trying to chase down the landlord. What we do is, we go through the criminal aspect, and we have to comply again, with the rules of criminal procedure and our citations. They, a lot of times, go through warrant. They can pay them through the mail sometimes, but most often, if something is on a tax sale, the citations are generally not going to address the situation. Simply because if they're not paying any of the taxes or the utilities, it's less likely they're going to pay any kind of fines. And keep in mind that there, for everyone, that fines are punitive, and what we do with the action is punitive. So it's something for doing something bad. You sped or you trespass. It's a fine for doing something, violating something. They're designed to punish, not compel. Compel is a whole different arena where it requires civil action, and we're not afraid to do that. And it's just finding the right, making sure that everything's in place. You really have to make sure everything's in place before you can prompt what's called an action and equity or some type of injunctive measure. But, yeah, that is one of our most difficult charges. And it has gotten better only because not so much as from an enforcement standpoint, but from the standpoint of the city in conducting its demolition exercise. We have one of the most aggressive demolition programs in the state. There isn't anyone that has the in-house demolition. The amount of resources that we've gotten just say over the past 5 years it's just been phenomenal. We haven't had these kind of resources to conduct demolitions in my previous years with the city. So we're adjusting that particular portion of it. And just so everyone, I actually absolutely detest demolition. I think it's the last resort. Obviously, trying to catch properties before they fall into dilapidation is the goal. But, oftentimes, because of the different situations, people walking away, people that have passed away, sold the property to an out-of-state organization. Just a lot of different ways that to walk that the property ends up being on our plate. So enforcement is challenging. We are, as the mayor said to everyone, we are working at the state level. We already have one state law passed, signed into law by Governor Ridge. We have 3 more to go, and I think we're making some very significant headway. Actually, I'm starting to see the light at the end of a very, very long tunnel. Finally, with a lot of these things get in place, we'll start be able to catch our breath and try and gain some ground.
Yeah, and I know we've had some success on the state level, and we're moving in that direction. But what are a couple things that you would like to see changed that maybe we can get changed here as we move forward that would make a positive difference for Harrisburg?
I mean, ideally, in a perfect world, if there's some way that we could, we always try and deter. I always try and deter people from purchasing, a condemned property. I reach out to them, and I know they're buying that, so they understand, what they're getting into. So they go into this transaction with eyes open. Otherwise, we're going to be back to the same situation that the previous owner got into. Trying to address the blight at the early stages. That's where it's important for us to do, to make sure that sometimes it's very difficult to get our cases heard and get very positive results, not to be disingenuous to the DJs. But a lot of times, between having to go in and then having continuance after continuance or a meager fine associated with something, I mean, having the fines, it's leverage, and sometimes it prompts someone to address something before they end up just saying, I'm done with it. They walk away, and it ends up the city's plate to deal with. So as far as what we can do is remain vigilant, and going after these individuals and trying to encourage the district justice to please, it's their community as well, to make sure that the rulings for these are just, they're appropriate for the particular situation that they're dealing with. But that's kind of where we're at. It's catching it before it gets to the point that it is upon our demolition list. It's absolutely critical. And again, continuing with the enforcement, just maintaining vigilance, keeping on it. That's where we're going to see some results. And we haven't been able to do that in previous years. That's any development we've been able to actually pursue within the past 5-6 years. Actually, when we started getting more officers, we could really. We're actually a force to be reckoned with. We're actually in the game before we were, a little bit disenchanted. But with our full team and everything now, the enthusiasm there, the morale is there. I think we'll start seeing a lot more changes as things progress.
Well, thanks, Dave. I think that's a good way to end at least our conversation. You mentioned a couple things towards the end that I think we should highlight, which is that it is your department which sort of maintains the demolition priority list that works with our in-house team and our external contractors to do demolition in the city. We demo a lot of properties in Harrisburg, and we've done many every year. But with the age of the housing stock and with some of the deeply entrenched issues of poverty in our city, more seem to get added every year, and that is the last resort is demolition. The goal is how can we avoid that or avoid things deteriorating to that level. You also talked about the role of the district justices, which I think is important to highlight here. There's they are the sort of cornerstone of the justice system here when it comes to all of these types of complaints, and I want to give them appreciation for how much they have clearly embraced the eviction moratorium. I mean, that is an example of everybody working together and making sure that we were all on the same page to make a difference and address an immediate health crisis. So that's a good point to highlight. And Momin, do you want to finish us off with any final questions related to codes?
Yes, I think we have time for one more question here, and we're happy to accept more questions on the Facebook comments, or feel free to call 311. I'll toss this to Ann. As Ann, you were talking about the permit forms. How long should we expect to wait until we hear back after submitting a permit form?
So permits are usually signed off on after the review within 24, 48 hours. If it's something that the plan review, Jeffrey Knight would have to review, like fences or putting up sheds, that is underneath his purview, it may take longer. And then there may be additional time too, if it's exterior work and it's in the historic area.
Right.
Those permit applications do take longer. But if planning, zoning doesn't need to look at it, or the historic, then those permits are usually signed off on within 24, 48 hours. Now, that does not mean the larger projects where the plan reviews have to be done with the larger prints for big projects, commercial projects.
Sure. And that's an interesting segue from last week's discussion where we talked about HARB and the historic review process in the city. And obviously, if you're submitting a permit for work within a municipal historic district, then it has that extra layer of review before the permit can be granted. If you're doing a massive project that requires a land development plan or to go before the zoning hearing board to grant some sort of zoning exception or variance, then obviously that review is going to take longer. But if you're just doing a repair on a home that is over $1,000 but not in a historic district, it should be a very, very straightforward process to get that permit approved and approved quickly. So I've learned a lot today, Momin. I think that was helpful. I want to thank you both, Dave and Ann, for joining us and for talking more about what your department does here in the city. And to all those watching, I know there are a lot of questions about this. I see them on social media every day. We'll continue to try and get you answers. Feel free to continue to post on this link, and we'll monitor it. And as I think one of the themes we saw here is that we have a department that is fully staffed and is eager and able to get out there and to help work towards positive change in the community. It is a two-way street. It does require good communication, documentation, the filling out of forms, all of us working together to try and make Harrisburg better. So thank you both, Dave and Ann. Thank you, Momin, for another great show. Yep. And we will be back again next week, already in the works for a really interesting conversation discussion on Facebook Live. So thank you for watching another community conversation. We will see you next time. And until then, I'm Mayor Eric Pappenfuss saying stay safe and thank you for watching.